We are going to have a little panel about investment and money. So like the adage goes, money makes the world go round, and even the aerospace world goes around with money. What we have seen lately is a lot more investment coming from the venture capital sources, the PE sources, because there is a lot of innovation that is back into aerospace. And so to talk about all of these different issues, especially new ones that pop up every day, we have with us three esteemed guests, and I will have themselves introduce each other. Please.
Sergio, thank you. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Robbie Samancha-Roy. I'm a managing director with a private equity firm called Cerberus Capital Management. And my background is in the aerospace world. I previously was at Lockheed Martin, and actually also worked with a startup, Electra.Aero, in the advanced air mobility world. Sergio, this is where we interacted on the reality of the AAM Reality Index, and spent some time prior to that on the Senate Armed Services Committee and at the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House. So really pleased and honored to join this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. And the koalas on the socks are awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Michael, please.
Hi, I'm Michael Diamond. I'm with the managing partner of Nexa Capital Partners, based in Washington, D.C. I'm an aerospace engineer. Went to the dark side, which is finance, about 20 years ago. We have some very exciting investment-related activities that we're going to touch on a few of them, I hope, during this session, and looking forward to it. Thank you.
I'm the odd person out. My name is Rafferty Jackson. I come from an operator background that has nothing to do with space or aviation. I built my career in Silicon Valley in technology back in the 90s. And my career path eventually took me to joining companies that made things and sold things. And eventually I helped build Beats by Dr. Dre and sell it to Apple for $3 billion. After doing that, I decided that I would try to, do you need somebody's attention?
The microphone.
I decided that I would try to follow my passion. And my passion was I could tell that the STEM founders in space we're going to solve our hardest problems here on Earth, and I believe that fundamentally, and I started working in the space industry on the very early side. So I'm in the incubators and accelerators at the universities, and then from there I've ended up developing a career where I'm now independent investment committee member for Seraphim Space Venture Fund 2, which is our new fund that's doing seed and pre-seed. And I do a lot of work that crosses over into aerospace because of I help on the space side of New Vista Capital. That's a capital company founded by Dennis Muhlenberg, where they're looking at a lot of aviation, and it's crossing over because over in space, we're looking at a lot of the same things. So I was invited to the panel to kind of bring a side conversation over on sort of what's happening in space that could be affecting aviation, things you should know about the way money's moving over in space that might be affecting your industry.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for the introduction. So the way that we want to do it is we're going to have some questions for our panelists and have a discussion. And then at the end, I will leave some time for audience questions. And please don't be shy. In general, as you have seen, we want to cover the whole breadth of aerospace. So let's start with this first question. So in today's aerospace world, we see more and more legacy companies competing with startups for both commercial and military contracts. What is the investment outlook that you see in light of this trend? And Robbie, get us started, please.
Okay, well, thank you, Sergio. So the heart of the question really is the differences and distinctions between what we call legacy or traditional aerospace and then, the startup, the emerging tech world. Many people try to show kind of a dichotomy between these two communities, but at the end of the day, really the question becomes is, where is the element of insertion of technology, emerging technology for new ideas, and then how do you actually scale these things in terms of thinking about things like production operations, supply chain controls, advanced manufacturing techniques, et cetera. And so how, from a perspective of looking at investments or just in general the dynamics of the aerospace industry, it's not an either-or proposition. This is an element of really the non-traditionals have interesting emerging technology that they're taking higher risk potentially. And the other element to also consider is within the government sector, whether it's on the civil side or especially on the national security side that I'm most familiar with. There's the element of the companies being able to have the regulatory and the various policy elements and structures in place to be able to deal with the government from an acquisition perspective. So what I would say is ultimately is that the interesting dynamic is the government has a very clearly defined framework of working with legacy companies. There's a lot of structure and discipline. There's a lot of scalability, producibility, and then you have the world of where there's interesting new ideas. There's a lot of risk. And ultimately, the challenge that our community has is for these two communities to work together to take new ideas and bring them to scale for solving really hard challenges, both at the civil, the commercial, and the national security fronts.
Thank you. Michael, with your experience on the commercial side.
Yes, so your points are very well taken. The legacy aerospace companies that have become household names over the last many years are going to be essential, bringing their capabilities, especially in scaling up new technologies so that we have industry-wide benefits. A good example of that is the air traffic control system of the United States that needs to be modernized. That's obvious. I mean, since Norm Mineta's efforts back in the 1990s, we haven't made much progress. But nonetheless, the legacy aerospace companies have the size and the capability to be able to tackle modernization. And now if we think about how to integrate innovative technologies that are being invested in at the startup level, you can look at, for example, weather systems, modern aviation weather systems, companies like TrueWeather, and companies building LiDAR, et cetera, that have to have these new technologies integrated into the next generation of air traffic control. So it will be essential for us as investors to consider or to continue to make strategic investments in the innovative side of the industry with the hope that the legacy companies can use their very strong capabilities to build new infrastructure that will be essential for new industries like advanced air mobility, like the drone sector, like the space sector, et cetera. So it's essential to keep the legacies and the startups working together and even to accelerate that type of dynamic.
Yeah.
Rafferty, what about from up there in space?
I think the joke this past week has been, if Elon Musk decides to do it, he does it and he wipes out your portfolio. So a great example of, competing, because now I would call SpaceX legacy, because they're behaving and sitting in a way that's legacy, right? They've been here 20 years, they've got all the money, they've got all the power so one of the big exciting things in space right now that we're talking about that might have a first commercial market is going to be drugs that are built in space. So crystals grow in microgravity in a way that you can't grow down here. And we're seeing unbelievable opportunity to bring that down mass back down. And really, you're truly talking about affecting people's lives, right? So drugs that can only be done intravenously could now be a pill, or could be delivered in a way that person never has to go to the hospital. So everybody's very excited about that. And lo and behold, all of a sudden he announces Starfall. So now they're gonna start doing down massing. So if SpaceX decides to do down massing, you've just wiped out 5 different startups I can think of that are all tacking down massing. So the legacy on space is a really interesting issue because the legacy companies, the Lockheeds, the Boeings, the Honeywell, they are all critical to the startups in space, because startups in space really honestly only have one customer right now, and that's the military. So pretty much every single startup right now has to be in a dual use position to be able to prove up their technology because of how long these times are to develop. So at some point they're competing-ish, but it's such a small level compared to what the primes are doing. But you're seeing a lot of collaboration. So at this moment in time, you're seeing the primes being pretty interested, including, for example, today at Lockheed, I was talking to one of their leaders in the VC and the CVC, which is their investment wing. They've created a whole new division that kind of sits outside Lockheed to try to figure out how can we bring a startup in but keep their magic? Because we know if we push them into the Lockheed machine, like all organisms, it'll just get eaten up. And I've had that happen in the companies that I've been part of. I was in a big organization, we got a little startup, we loved it, and then we eventually dismantled the whole thing and smashed it down. So they're figuring out that they've got to behave differently to get all the magic that comes out of these innovative ideas. But at the same time, these are products that are going into warfighter hands or going into high-risk environments. So you can't just be slap an app together and let's go. But on the space side right now, I would say most people don't look at the primes as a competitor. They look at them as an enabler, maybe somebody that's a roadblocker, and that's good. Because if they're kind of standing still, there's a way to kind of move around them. And the one area I'd say that startups really just went around them entirely is GPS. So commercial GPS is absolutely coming. Zona has their constellation up. TrustPoint is close to getting their constellation up. And that'll be one area where you'll see startups really just kind of move around how slow. Or maybe there wasn't a market big enough for the primes to figure out, but the space startups have moved around into it.
So Sergio, if I may, we have a graphic that we can perhaps pull
Please.
up that kind of just we can talk through a little bit what we've all been mentioning. Let's see if that
It's up.
Is it up? No, it's that's. If you wouldn't mind putting up the slide, please.
You have the oh, it is up. It's on the side.
It's on the side here.
It's
Oh,
on
I
the
see.
side.
Okay, so we're seeing. Okay, so Sergio, so the point to be made here that we've all been sort of essentially highlighting is that the classical funding paradigm for decades since the end of World War II has really been this interplay between government. And we've been talking about traditionals or the primes, for instance. You had mentioned Lockheed Martin, in the heart of Silicon Valley, Sunnyvale, for instance. But then working with academia, and then working with the government laboratories, for instance, like the Air Force Research Lab. And this was a very, very productive ecosystem that this triangle between government, industry, and academia was really behind much of all the innovations that we are still benefiting from. But at the end, this system essentially became, if you will, hyper-optimized, driven by the demand signals that came from the Cold War, which were really operating at the decadal level. And one could argue that almost everything that comes about in science and technology came out of basic research that was funded by this ecosystem. But what we're seeing today is now a four-legged, if you will, construct, where in addition to industry, government, and academia, you now have the emergence of the institutional finance sector. So you have things like venture capital, you have private equity, investment banks, sovereign wealth funds, even high net worth individuals. And they are providing a source of income or revenue to companies, and now this entire landscape is not just a few primes, but it is a rich, vibrant landscape of a lot of small companies. But as you know, the dynamics are that maybe only 1 out of 10 or 12 are ever going to be successful. And so the question, really the challenge is that you have interesting new ideas that bubble up. Is there going to be a market and an adaptation strategy that will ultimately make those ideas successful? And just to finish is interesting, sort of phrase when people talk about that the government has been the first to invent things, the last to adopt and innovate to actually bring in. So really the role that this vibrant, non-traditional sector has been is to bubble up a lot of these ideas, see what actually sticks, and then ultimately you have the government, large firms, et cetera, carry things ultimately to scale. So it's really about now scalability. Thank you.
Thank you. So we see a much more diverse portfolio of opportunities when it comes to funding. Even if, when it comes to funding from the private sector, it's always come with caveats. Government has been there's more largesse, and it funds things that are more risky. Now, let's shift a little bit gear and talk about aerospace infrastructure. And infrastructure has never been as sexy as the airplanes, the helicopter, the rockets, but without it, nothing's going to work. First thing you encounter in your air travel is an airport. It's not an airplane. So if the airport doesn't work, then the airplane
Doesn't work either.
doesn't work either. So when it comes to these, For example, the ATC modernization, the inclusion of commercial space, because it needs to go through the layer where the other airplane operates. This upcoming market for advanced air mobility. So what do you think? How will it all be funded, and what should be the approach of private versus government? Michael, do you want to get us started?
Sure. We're at a very interesting nexus, I think, right now in the United States. The air traffic control system of the U.S., as we all know, is quite antiquated, and it has to be modernized. But this is a theme that's been around for over 30 years. You have to go back to Norman Mineta, the Secretary of Transportation in the 1990s, to really see the roots of all this. But Congress has not allocated much in the way of funding to modernize the air traffic system. Now we're seeing the emergence of the advanced air mobility sector. This is eVTOLs, it's drones, it's a brand new industry, and it's frankly it's a very frothy opportunity area. It's worth, in our estimation, many hundreds of billions of dollars. But it cannot be possible to launch this industry to its full scale without a very significant investment to be made in modernizing the low-altitude air traffic control system. The Congress just allocated $12 billion. It's in the beautiful big bill that came out recently. There's no mention in the legislation or the report or anything about the importance of instrumenting low-altitude the low-altitude airspace to be able to accommodate massive numbers of drones that are going to be operating commercially, nor for that matter from a national security standpoint. I mean, we really have to understand that the country is extremely vulnerable given what we're seeing in Ukraine and the innovations, if you call it that have given the warfighters incredible capabilities, and terrorists are sitting up and taking note. So we have to modernize the system, and I think the aerospace industry needs to begin to mobilize along these lines. Now, this is a $12 billion investment that Congress is appropriating, so that's good. This is definitely, it's a surprise, but it's a wonderful surprise because government pretty much everywhere else is broke. This is a significant amount of public money that'll be allocated to this, but it'll require probably another $20 billion to complete the modernization of the air traffic system, and that money is likely to have to come from the private sector. Now at NEXA, we have funded air traffic control infrastructure ourselves. The ADS-B network in the United States was funded with our funding. The Iridium Ariane air traffic, the ADS-B system in space was also funded privately. So there are good models of public-private partnership that can work in this area. And on Wall Street, there's about $3 trillion of capital that's sitting more or less idle. There's plenty of money out there. What the country needs is a business case facilitated by good government policy, and we're waiting to see that happen.
Rafferty, how about the space?
I think the challenge that we have is we need to be included too, and our use cases are very different. So when I was talking about the down massing, right? So something coming back down to earth that's not landing in the ocean. Varda is a company in El Segundo that's been able to down mass 3 times, really important drug cases, but they've had to leave the United States for down massing. So they are now down massing, I think, into either Australia or New Zealand, and it was because they just couldn't sort it with the FAA. They can get the launch, they can get the product up, they're building it in El Segundo, but the ability to bring it back down is something that's difficult, and part of this is because we have a commercial industry of, an airline and aviation industry that's got an antiquated system that is not going to be able to digest. Now there's a down massing corridor somewhere, and that will be happening, right? So we have to, we've usually been on the forefront of drug development, but I would not be surprised if you see drug development start to leave the country, because the labs that are going to be building it and the people that are going to be down massing it and the microgravity are not going to be able to do it here. Then the other thing that I think is really interesting is the government and the military has been asking specifically, including doing things like coming to a startup space competition I run in Washington, D.C. for the satellite conference, They really want to talk about, could we put supplies onto platforms in low Earth orbit and then downmass that directly to, within 100 feet of our troops to be able to deliver something as needed immediately. So what we've really been talking about is use cases of either setting up a camp, putting all the stuff you need if your troops are trapped overnight and you want to be able to have them in habitats. So that means they're platforms downmassing directly into, it could be a war conflict scene, so that's a little different, but it could not be. It could be a first responder situation. And then we're also talking about, landing, taking off from California and landing in Japan with a rocket, right, to be able to move troops. So if you take the antiquated system, and now we layer in on top of that you've got downmassing happening somewhere, then you layer in on top of that maybe you have rockets that are just doing deliveries, like there's a company called AIAA that's doing levitation launching, so I think they're gonna hit space in about a second, and then the rocket will launch from there and it can land. All of that will also be happening, right? So as we build our aviation system for air traffic control, I think we have to have a good conversation about what do we mean by air traffic control, right? Because now we're going to have balloons, we're going to have all sorts of other things happening. And then I think the other thing that's interesting that we talked a little bit about in preparation for the panel is we're talking about military assets becoming part of a sensor chain, right? So a sensor in geostation, geo communicating with something in LEO, communicating with an airplane. And it's going to be communicating. And so we're going to have all these communication signals as well. So all of it would be great to be looked at. If it doesn't get looked at, there's definitely competitor sovereign nations that will take the business and are waiting to take the business if America decides not to take it.
Robbie, with your experience on the military side, what are your thoughts?
Well, so first I was just going to say, I mean, it's really about incentives and really about private or public-private partnerships. And at the end of the day, when we say incentives, it's like, how can we financially engineer things that you have a good outcome from a quality of service perspective, and look at innovative ways of things like, is it going to be government-owned, government-operated? Is it government-owned, contractor-operated? Is it contractor-owned, contractor-operated, right? These are various mechanisms. But at the end, when it comes to infrastructure, one example, it's not really infrastructure, but you can draw an analogy, is look what recently happened with the Defense Department and rare earth elements. So the play here was that the Defense Department said, okay, we have a strategic national issue about rare earth elements. They're very important for not only the military, but also for writ large our nation. And so the DoD will step in and say, look, we are going to guarantee a certain offtake. We are going to guarantee a floor on pricing because there are certain other countries that have been trying to play very aggressively and competitively to basically capture the market. And so you had a very interesting, well-engineered government play. Now, how it pans out over the next 10 years will remain to be seen, but it's an example of how to creatively think about incentives and structures. So I think for our aerospace community, even from an academic perspective, bringing in business folks, public policy folks to think about innovative, creative ways is really going to be important to solve these very challenging national issues.
Okay, and it's very interesting. It reminds me of the book, The Laws of Norman Augustine, ex-CEO of Lockheed Martin, that extrapolated this defense budget in the future, where we're going to build one Death Star a year, and it's only going to be used by alternated between the three services once a year. Now, if we continue to stay in space, so space is playing an ever-increasing central role. You talked about medicine. There is a million other things that we can do up in space in microgravity that we cannot do down here. And as a science fiction guy, can we go any faster? So we go from defense to communication. I mean, the E7 got money taken out because we want to put the surveillance in space. What is the investing community approach to space, both from the commercial and the military side?
So we were talking about this on the Ascend side this morning, and the general consensus is still the commercial market for space is not yet here. It's coming, and it is definitely developing, but if you've been over in space, you've been hearing like every year, here it comes, here it comes, here it comes. It's not coming yet. People are starting to see the beginning of it, But the startups that are making money are not launching hardware. They are taking the data from all the constellations that are out there. So Earth observation is the market that's showing commercial. But the people that are building companies are things like 4 insurance brokers who had kids who knew how to code have started an insurance company by using all this data, and they're now issuing flood insurance because they're going to use space data to be able to manage those customers. Very specific use case, very much from the data, but definitely the billions of dollars that have gone into those constellations are not going to get recovered by this insurance company. So we're still really mismatched in how you think about commercial. Definitely the military spending is where you're seeing most of our space companies be able to prove that they have a customer and that they can service a customer. We're still whittling out what we call the space geeks, so people who like, I invented something and I want to put it up. And that we're still whittling that out of our system because that's research, that's academics, but that's not an economic engine. That's not value creation into an economy. So on the space side, we're definitely servicing the military, right? That's definitely the Space Force, the Air Force. We're actually servicing now everybody. Submarines have amazing use cases for a lot of the assets that are going up in space. Obviously, with warfare, that's becoming something that people are more concerned about. Will there ever be commercial space? Because if it's a war-fighting domain, you're not going to put a Hilton hotel right in the middle of a war-fighting domain. So will there really be that many humans up there? So it's still kind of out as far as the time goes on commercial. I think one thing I was going to mention on space, though, is we're still getting a lot of investment, and that's something that I'm not sure your startups would be seeing as much as our startups. So just this last quarter, if you do April to June, it was $3 billion in investment from VCs. So that's actual, or PE, so actual investing dollars going into space companies, and that was just last quarter. And we're seeing bigger later deals. So Impulse Space, the Tom Mueller, the fellow who's the rocket engineer designer for SpaceX, he now has his company out, and that company did a monumental raise. So we're starting to see that mature, but as far as commercial goes, I think it's still, you're still going to be a bit away from it until you see it. I think I said GPS, I think will be the first thing that we all see. I'm not sure how we'll know it happened. A lot of industries will know it happened. Personally, I think eventually I'd see something on my Google phone say, do you still want free GPS that's plus or minus 10 meters? Or do you want to pay $2.99 a month and get it down to 1 centimeter? Because that's the kind of precision you'll be able to have coming from the low Earth GPS.
I love that comment on GPS. I started my career at Canadian Marconi Company running their GPS program in the 1970s. A lot of people don't realize that GPS has been around for 50 years. It's truly remarkable. What we've been trying to do at Nexa and with some partnerships we have with the venture community is to try to shift the incentive model. As we know, the venture industry likes software investment, soft tech, because there's not much of a CapEx requirement. You can fund a team of very bright people who can go into an office building and produce a product that's going to have a return very quickly. The issue with dual-use technologies and some of the technologies and markets that we're talking about right now is there's a very heavy CapEx requirement. You have to build a factory, you have to purchase optical production equipment, very specialized capital equipment, et cetera, and it changes the returns for venture quite dramatically. What we've been trying to do with work we've been doing with Congress and the Small Business Administration is to shift the leverage ratio. Right now, you can go, as a venture fund, you can go and apply to the SBA through its SBIC program to get a 1.2 to 1 lever or a 2 to 1 lever. That's not going to cut it. If you want to equivalence returns on investment, there's a responsibility, I think, that Congress needs to fulfill to change the leverage model. A 4 to 1 lever begins to provide the best returns that can begin to narrow the gap between soft tech and hard tech or deep tech. And we're hoping to see some of that legislation come through now with the Office of Strategic Capital. And the current appropriation process has actually taken a first step to provide hundreds of millions of dollars of new leverage funding along these lines. These new funds will be more capable of putting larger amounts of money into investments that are much longer term and still satisfy the competitive needs of limited partners and investors. So we're seeing this as one potential tool that can really help the United States to boost its dual use or frankly commercial capital investment opportunities so we can scale up and take a much more aggressive role investing in deep tech and hard tech.
Thank you. Robbie.
Yeah. Well, a lot to digest and unpack here in the space world. I think one of the things we should probably mention, because we haven't been explicit, we kind of just think that this is just common knowledge, but when it comes to private capital investing, there really is a distinction between the venture capital world and the private equity world, right? So I'm coming from Cerberus, which is a private equity company, and the philosophy and what is done in investing are very different. Right? So the venture capital world is sprinkling a little bit of money. Let's see 1,000 flowers bloom. Let's pick out what's going to come out, actually be successful. And it's small checks that are written at the seed, Series A and a little bit up the ladder. At the private equity level, this is about looking for companies that are mature, that are profitable, and now is there an investment that can be made to scale that company? So when it comes to space, Rafi, you are spot on that really at the end of the day, the driver right now and continues to be is basically Uncle Sam, largely in the defense world. And things like this Space Development Agency, now we'll see how things are going to evolve with Golden Dome and their space components, right? And what NASA has been doing in terms of the lunar program are all very critical drivers. Now, from a private equity perspective, things like proliferated LEO constellations where you're going to need hundreds, thousands of elements, right? So now you worry about the supply base, the supply chain. So where are all these batteries coming from? Where are solar cells coming from? Where are you getting optical terminal links? This is a scaling issue that is not a venture issue. This is where private equity can come and deploy capital for scaling factories, et cetera. That said, venture still can play a role in coming up with new innovative advanced manufacturing techniques that then can be scaled for these problems. The last thing I would say is on the venture capital side, to increase the probability of success, I always tell people, you think about DARPA's mindset with the Heilmeyer Catechism. Question number one is, what is the problem you really are trying to solve? And at the end of the day, you can come up with a brilliant idea, and if you're not solving a problem that somebody really needs to be solved, it's going to be a total waste of time. And so the ultimate issue is to understand that problem, and it doesn't have to be an official government requirement with a large R. It can be a need. It can be a requirement with a little r. What's that art of the possible? And that, I think, is really the dynamic that is driving. But to conclude, Sergio, I think in the private equity world, there are great opportunities from a supply chain perspective, the onshoring, and the potential growth that we're going to see in the national security arena. Like ultimately, the reconciliation bill for DoD had $150 billion. Significant portion of it was related to things that are in some form or fashion touch upon the space environment.
And so on the software side, it's really interesting because the software side has been a real bottleneck for hardware design, right? When you talk to hardware designers, they'll tell you the software systems they're in are sometimes memory, their memory, Excel spreadsheets, trying to get 10 different systems. So one exciting thing that's happening in space that will come into aviation, I believe, full stop, because that's the big idea, is that we call SpaceX the world's largest incubator. Because if you look at the ecosystem of companies that have come out of SpaceX, they're really changing the space industry, and they're also making all sorts of other big changes in clean energy and composites and manufacturing. But one of them in particular, you'll see a bunch of software. So for example, there's a company called Epsilon 3, which is straight out of the woman who was in charge of the manned crew for SpaceX. When you hear her story about how absurd it was to run a human crew system on non-software because there was no system. That was just not acceptable. So she started a software company, and now she's selling her system into aviation systems, right? Because it's the same exact thing. It's difficult to build hardware. You want to make sure you're understanding all the testing, the operating, how does it work. So I think even though software has a different parameter for how we invest, it's the software companies that are going to save the VC portfolios, right? Because the software companies are going to show success faster. So now you're seeing the VCs try to just mix it. They still want to be in hardware. They still want to be able to say, I helped launch the first orbital transfer vehicle because that's important, but now they can say, oh, and I've invested in a few just software companies. So I think the VCs are going to be able to hold their portfolios together longer because they have some of these pure AI plays, pure insurance plays, but using space data. So I think that'll be really helpful. And then the composites is really interesting because the composites of space and some of the revolution over there is coming into your industry, right? Like I was talking to some folks from auto, and that they're getting a laminar flow because of the composite that they can use, which came out of space. So you're seeing the industries really start to feed into each other. And then the maturity that aviation has been really helpful for space because, you know, it isn't Star Trek. You know, physics is real, right? Math is real. And when you have more mature companies, investors, people that have been around, be able to say, oh, we tried that 30 years ago, it didn't work. Let me hear your idea again. That's also a way that you're seeing all of these industries kind of come together, but they are all bottlenecked by lack of policy, lack of understanding where the money and the capital is going to come from, lack of understanding how long are we in it for. Are we really in it because we're war fighting, or are we in it because we're actually trying to build a new economy?
And one other point will be interesting is with the the emergence of large language models that are basically you can do pretty good software coding with them. Is how is that going to impact the software workforce over time? That is definitely a very interesting issue. And then tying into testing, continuous testing, and regulatory and safety elements that are so unique to the aerospace sector. These are all really interesting issues that are going to have to pan out over time.
Thank you. So we know space is coming, but if you want to get your fix on commercial space, go watch For All Mankind. So let's shift a little bit by talking about Made in America, right? The aerospace industry, and with aerospace I mean aero and space, it's always been multinational, right? We go for the best things that are out there. Many times we go for the cheapest things that are out there in order to make money. But now this Made in America is becoming a central tenet of our administration. So how are we doing when it comes to investment in component, munitions, scaling, workforce, in order to do this Made in America? Can there be a Made in America? Robbie, get us started.
Okay, well, there's quite frankly the world of policy and law, and then there's the world of Benjamins that really drive things, right? It's about incentives. So one can stipulate, one can make these mandates, but at the end of the day, what really are the financial incentives? Where are the contracts? Where are the things that are going to actually underwrite, bringing things from an onshoring perspective? So there's no question that COVID really illuminated serious deficiencies in not only the global supply chain, but also within the U.S. And really the uptake, the increase in many of the supply chain components for munitions and other things that we've been seeing over the last few years, and unfortunately things are going on in Ukraine, the things that were happening in the Middle East, have been driving also the demand signal for things to come back, at least within the national security arena, things that are like critical chemicals, et cetera, and the whole rare earth element, situation I mentioned before. So what I would say is that, there's this realization, things are moving in that direction, but at the end, it's much harder to do than actually that is said. And at the same time, we have to still understand the balance from an international perspective, that the role that our allies will play, the AUKUS, initiative with the Five Eyes nations, These are important things. So there's going to be a balance between sort of geostrategic politics with our allies and ultimately the situation that I'm sure many of you have read the book Freedom's Forge, where the underpinning of the U.S. industrial might to basically win World War II was in still a vibrant, deep industrial base and supply chain with domestically. So we're going to have that balance between those elements.
Michael, we were talking about tariffs, all this other good stuff. Please.
Yeah, so the aerospace, it's an aerospace conference. The aerospace industry is uniquely dependent on free trade and really was invented. It just talked to Boeing, asked Boeing the question about the importance of free trade, low tariffs, et cetera. The tariff policy that's coming out of the White House today can be disastrous for many industries that we work in and has to be rationalized very quickly. We see that with our portfolio. We have certain companies that are really struggling now because even talk of tariffs is putting off revenue sales. And there's no, to plan investment, et cetera, we need to understand what the long-term costs of everything is going to be in our industry. You can't turn on a dime here. We're not building N95 masks in our industry. We're building very complex systems of systems with aircraft, et cetera. And this is going to be a significant policy challenge and economic challenge for our sector, no doubt about it. We have a company in our portfolio today that exports many of its aircraft to Brazil. And if you've heard the news in the last week or so about Bolsonaro and 50% tariff levels, this is a potential disaster for companies like that. And there are many companies like that are dependent in aerospace on exports. And reciprocity is going to be a big challenge. So we have some very significant headwinds here that have to be sorted out, I believe, over the next few months, if not few weeks, to keep our industries moving forward.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I always think about, when I sold Beats to Apple, one of the things that, look, at Beats, because we were amazing, right? You're in your company, you're amazing. We're making, I can't disclose how much we were making a year, but we were selling like crazy. And then we moved inside of Apple, and they did more revenue in 3 hours than we did in 1 year, right? So the scale was just absurd. And that's what I feel like this whole situation is. It's such an absurdly difficult moment in time, I'm not even sure I can grasp it, right? Because part of me is so excited that Americans are going to stop telling all their children to go to college, because that was absurd. We don't need everybody going to college. Not everybody's built for college. That's not how, there's no rule that says you should go do that, right? We should have people going into the military service. We should have people going into the trades. We should have people, doing a gap year. So my generation, everybody went to college. I feel like everybody in my social group from my high school, they're miserable. They are not fulfilled people. They've done what they were told to do, and it was nothing that they wanted to do. They wanted to be a mechanic, or they wanted to really do what their uncle was doing, which was being a plumber. But when you came through education in the 70s and 80s, everybody had to go to college. And now we're back to kind of that idea. What I'm hoping is with Made of America, we just get more rational about a workforce. A workforce can't all be knowledge workers. We need people that are making. We need people that know how to make. We need to find the people who want to make, and we need to support them in making. Because I always say when there's apocalypse, all of us die, because I don't know how to do anything. I'm trying to learn how to garden, and that's about as far as I've gotten. But I can't, all the science fiction books, people are whooping up stuff. I'm the person who, just kill me and eat me, because there's nothing I'm going to be able to do besides keep the other people alive, because I have literally no skills that can help in the real world. So I do like the idea of Made in America, bringing back a rational point of view into how should people be in the world. And it should be more free form. If you're great at making, you should go making. If you're great at being an academic, you should be an academic. If you're not sure, you should be able to find something to go do. But we shouldn't just be an economy based on how many headphones can I sell you, how many sneakers can I sell you, how much consumerism can I sell you. It'd be great if we're making again. But back to this idea of like, we were doing great at Beats and then we sold to Apple and 1 minute later, my entire revenue for 1 year got whomped by 3 hours. So Apple didn't care, pick up the phone to answer my phone call. That's how big that problem was. I don't know how we're gonna get there. The idea of being able to make these components here is so far away in time because now we need to get everybody to come here, to build a workforce here, to then teach young people how to do it. I mean, it is almost like I have a very hard time understanding how we do Made in America without it being like Made in America and with our allies. Like a something bigger, so maybe we start kind of dividing the world a little bit better. So maybe we don't let our key components be made by people that technically we identify as our adversary. So if our military talks about that country as an adversary, maybe we in commercial should say, we probably shouldn't buy from them. Maybe we should be buying from somebody else. But I'm excited about it, but I also just don't grasp it. I literally can't get my head around it. All I have said things like, I have a nephew who's a great software programmer, and I've told him, I know you like robotics and you like software programming, but you should probably also maybe become a mechanical engineer on the robots. Because I'm not totally sure your job is going to exist and making always exists. Being able to do something with your hands always exists. And I've told other people, yeah, you should go into business, but first learn how to make something. So it's a big problem because we don't have the trade schools. When I was in high school, we had a car repair. I took a car repair shop. I took the woodworking shop. They don't have anything. But they also don't have drone labs, right? So if you go to a local high school and now they have a drone lab, then I'm going to feel more, okay, now I see the first step on the path. But right now I'm standing around just like, this problem's so big, I don't even see the first step of how we're going to do it.
So let's just...
So I just may add is though, I am a little hopeful on this. I was last week at this event in Detroit called Reindustrialize 2.0. And there is a lot of energy. It basically largely fueled by the venture world, but bringing in new ideas, software, hardware integration, robotics, AI-enabled advanced manufacturing. And really the dynamic is that we now have largely a subtractive, analog, but certified industry in terms of manufacturing. And now we have this digital, largely additive, but not certified sector. And so the challenge is going to be is to bring these two communities together so that you have a hybrid of additive, subtractive, you're going to be all digital, and you're going to be certified. That's really the challenge. But to get to to conclude on the workforce issue, I agree this is a big challenge. Like right now as we speak, the US Navy has publicly said that we need 250,000 new individuals into the workforce. That's 250,000 new people to build our ships and our submarines. That's just the maritime sector to be welders and pipe fitters. But I think the challenge is that we've got to use much more automation, and you'll still have people that have to fix the machines. So there's this interesting dynamic that is going to definitely play out. From my perspective, when I graduated from in grad school 30 years ago, there wasn't as many drone labs and things like that do it yourself. It was really much more the theoretical, computational side. So I think there's interesting dynamics that will be to the positive.
Yeah.
So if we don't have trade school, the zombie apocalypse comes, it's bad. If we build robots, robot apocalypse comes, bad. Let's talk about something else. So in general, is the US falling behind in aerospace investment, right? Before, we always looked at US as the center of the world when it came to aviation, but now other countries have copied the model, right? Europe copied the model of saying, invest into a giant, and then forgot the model lately by not investing into their next generation company. In China, there is an entire country that is building an aerospace at speeds that are amazing. Is it time for entrepreneurs to start looking outside the US to fund their companies? Are we falling behind? What do you think?
So let me talk about that because we have direct experience working in Saudi Arabia over the last several years. The Vision 2030 that some of you may be familiar with, that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has begun to implement, requires if you like, the modernization of many sectors, including aerospace, the airline sector, et cetera. There's an intent to invest in concert with the United States. The investment that is being made privately in the United States in advanced air mobility is a good example of that. I know, Sergio, you guys have done excellent work looking at the indigenous investment in vehicles. I think it's about a $10 billion. If you add to that another probably $20 billion that's coming through the 600 or 800 companies that are investing their own equity in advanced technologies and things of that nature, it's a very exciting industry that we're building here. Having said that, the regulatory system is holding us back very seriously. One reason why we read an article the last couple of weeks about Joby launching a commercial advanced air mobility operation in the Middle East is out of their frustration not being able to get aircraft certified in the United States. The FAA is putting certain sectors that we, as the private sector is invested in total jeopardy, and that has to be fixed. There has to be a more responsive regulatory regime, or we are going to lose industries. We're beginning to see the tip of the iceberg here with AAM and with eVTOLs and what's going on there. Europe also recognizes this issue. EASA is, I think, moving forward much more aggressively to support the certification of new products and technologies and capabilities that are coming out of the aerospace sector throughout Europe. So that is one area that critically is going to damage our country's ability to be and remain competitive. It's going to take our leadership away unless it gets fixed.
Robbie.
So what I would say is I totally agree with you on the regulatory front, but I still remain very bullish on the U.S. ecosystem. From an investment perspective, is we still have an incredible global competitive system, and just going to these conferences like at Reindustrialize and just seeing the students and things like that, there's a lot of ideas. But we have to worry about the regulatory element. We have to worry about crossing the valleys of death for taking new technologies to put them into products. And I have to say, let's be blunt, there is a bit of a reset going on with respect to our academic sector and government. I really fear of unintended consequences where we're going to lose essentially funding mechanisms for the basic research that have really driven our technological machine. And that is really going to be the devil in the details. There's nuance, what's happening, but I think that's going to be really one thing that, in addition to regulatory element, we've got to still ensure that our university ecosystem still is first and foremost the best in the world. It's being funded and it's being focused on solving, large, the grand challenges, so to speak. So that's I think what I would say on that front.
Maybe following in what you're saying in the university system, is there any worry that we're losing the minds? Because if I look at the last names of a lot of folks that have built innovation in this country, they don't sound American.
Oh, no, I think there's a lot of concern about that. Well, you're seeing it. I'm sure you all have stories right now about people that have chosen not to be here.
Mm-hmm.
But
we're leaving.
You wouldn't, right? Because why would you put your family? It's one thing for us to be, chewing our nails over a tariff. It's a different thing when you're talking about being removed from your home. So I think a lot of, most academics, I think it's pretty reasonable if they choose not to come here. The challenge is we have always been brave. And in academia, we've always been brave. We've always been willing to say, oof, that sounds out there, but if you do some work, give me another paper, give me another pass at it, I'll find you some money. And that's what's made our innovation engine so much more powerful over, the last at least 50 years, and say 100 probably, right? But it's one of the things that I think we all have to stand back and say, we know it's happening, and that's going to happen. So now what does that mean? So does that mean that we can only be looking at Americans to be innovative? And you already know all the evidence is innovation comes from diverse points of view coming together, and diverse meaning, not the naughty word of diverse, but the word meaning different points of view who have been raised differently, looking at a problem together will always solve it better. Because it's always more, there's always friction in the way that you're looking at it. You're not an echo chamber. I don't know if you guys use Claude. I love Claude as my AI because it literally tells me I'm a genius every day. Like every time I do something, it'll be like, that's amazing, that's so great, let me help you with this, But that's what you happen with the same people that are doing the problem solving together versus, really diverse people from all over the world. So yeah, I do think that that's a bit of a problem. Just a note of caution though, if you're ever, when you move out of the country, you're moving into legal regimes still here in the country that are very serious. So you have to be very careful about understanding who you're taking money from, who you're doing your contracts with. There's a lot of compliance and work that needs to be done on that. So make sure that you just get your legal advice. You can't take money from, you have to actually really understand to a very detailed level every penny you've taken into your company as an American company, even if you're even if you're somewhere else. So that's one of the complexities with being in a global environment. It's not hard to do, it's just something that's really important. And if you don't know the story, like a good story is to look at the history of Firefly. Great aerospace company, it's getting ready to go public. But if you go back and look at what they went through over the last 10 years, you will see, this is what happens when you have people in the cap table that are not qualified under, on the more military side of who are you allowed to do business with.
And Rafa, you mentioned before about the medical stuff and companies saying it's too complicated here in the US.
Well, that was Varda. So Varda has a well-known story, which is Varda had they're downmassing, so they had the license to launch. They feel confident, and the paperwork looks confident that they had the right to downmass too. But right before they were starting their re-entry, they got, from, everybody said, hold on, we didn't say you could downmass, and they said, no, you guys said we could downmass, and they had to, I think they were up in orbit 8 more months before they could bring it down, and then they couldn't get clarity. So they've just gone to, like I said, it's either Australia or New Zealand is where they're going to downmass. I had a long meeting with some folks in Arizona to talk about building a downmassing corridor into a part of Arizona that doesn't have much of a flight plan, because it seemed like a great place that you could build a business where they needed help and thinking of an idea. But now I'd say, if you can't get Joby to get a certified plane, I'm not totally clear you're going to get through all the regulatory to get to where you'd have a corridor here that would allow you to be downmassing regularly.
So this gets to the whole point from a technical perspective of the science of regulatory oversight, right? So in a world where you're going to think about digital twins, hyper-realistic simulation environments, how do you take physics-based models, anchor them in these synthetic environments, and help the regulatory environment? I think that's a very fascinating situation that we have to think through. And then there is the element of, for instance, you're talking about downmass, these corridors. Well, it's a very similar situation that the DoD is facing when we want to do hypersonic tests. Why do we have to go to Australia and test in Woomera if we can reopen corridors that we had been using, many decades ago? So it's really the interesting aspect of how do we allocate, resources. So that's physical resources. There's also spectrum. This is a whole nother issue too that really we address across the aerospace sectors is this tension between, the commercialization, national security uses, spectrum sharing, interesting technologies like simultaneous transmit and receive, right? So these are all other interesting things that we're going to have to kind of think through, and the investing community, especially on the venture side, has interesting opportunities to basically push forward ideas. But just to finish on the university side, because I know the university community is so when I mentioned a reset, I mean, the whole element of how Vannevar Bush in post-World War II kind of set up this incredible, ecosystem of government and industry and academia working together, there has to be just a readjustment, because when you look at costs of tuition rising faster than even inflation in healthcare, right, and overhead costs, these are some of the challenges that I think that academia, and even from an investing perspective, when you work with the academic partners, what are you getting from your return on investment is the issue. And also to focus on just not the paper producing, but ultimately how do you think through those next steps of crossing valleys of death? Because the ultimate value is in turning ideas into things of value.
True. So we've talked about, the U.S., investing in the U.S. Now, what I would like to ask you is, so how does this investment strategy for aerospace varies across the world? And maybe let's take U.S., Europe, and the Middle East. And do this compare and contrast of, what we're used to in this new world in which we might have to go outside, either because we have to or because, we want to. Michael, would you want to get started in this one?
Yeah, the paradigm I think that we face, and I truly believe that over the next 2 to 3 years here in the United States, there is such a significant shift in policy, and there will be an impact on investment philosophy, that it's a much more complex world that we're facing, and you can't ignore the tariff dynamic, the dynamics that are happening today in academia, especially in the United States, the fact that there will be a brain drain, I'm sure, and it may make it more attractive for us to be looking at other countries to replicate what was a successful model here. We may find a more successful model, let's say, in Northern Europe. That's one area that we do have some investment activities. So it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves. And we as investors, I think, need to step up and let the policy machinery in Washington understand that the changes, if they're not careful, the changes that we as an industry, especially the aerospace industry, are going to face could really either damage us or improve our standing overall. One thing to keep in mind, though, government is broke everywhere, and so that's one element that there needs to be, I think, a resetting of this what was a tremendous post-World War II balance of government, industry, and academia participation. That's all shifting. And we have to be really smart as a country and ensure that the policies that we adopt are adopted with eyes wide open.
Rafferty.
Yeah, so just getting down to what's the difference, right? So I do a lot of work in Europe, and boy, the European VC is a very different animal than the American VC. I mean, I would almost not even call it the same industry. So on the European side, they are looking for what I think of as more traditional PE. They're looking for revenue, a return on the investment, how many customers do you have? I mean, it's a very, they're expecting a lot of commercial signal early on for deep tech companies, and that's just not how deep tech has traditionally worked in America. On the American side, VCs have been willing to kind of come together, look at the team and say, if we believe this is the right team and this is the right idea, we will put money towards it even though you do not even have a customer. And even though you might not even have a customer for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. That's how things like Google are up and running, right? So it's a really different mindset. So if you're on the European side, you will have your VCs will be asking you different questions. It's a different way that they've done their investment from their LPs. It's a different way that they think about managing the risk. It's a different way of thinking about managing the portfolio. I definitely feel that there's a lot of friction for the companies that I'm in that are on the deep tech, the harder side, like a university spin-out that I was sitting on their board. That was a lot of friction. That's almost like a mismatch of money to the idea. On the American side of it, though, don't get confused and think if you're talking to a founder who's been funded that has meaning, because we have a mismatch of signal. There's a lot of founders getting funded in the American system that are not good founders, and it's not a good idea. But because the money is flowing in such a different way over here. So to some degree, if you're a successful European founder, you're probably pretty good. You probably have been able to get the product and the commercial side all spinning up at the same time. And on the American side, I'm still gonna kind of side-eye you. And then we have this whole other problem that none of us are talking about, and I don't even know, maybe we need another thing. We have what'd you say, we had government, we have military, we have VC, or we have funding, and now we have billionaires. Because billionaires are a category in and of themselves that are changing markets. And they are not sovereign, and they are not aligned with their nations, and they are doing things and behaving in different ways that I think at some point we have to sort of all be real about the fact that there's a whole other factor when you're thinking about, when you think about what SoftBank has done, right? Taking that much money and moving it. It's all sort of another thing that you have to be thinking about as you're going through it, but it's very different depending on where you are. And I do know, like, for example, if you raise money in Asia, that's a really active investor. You are going to be talking to them all the time. So that's another, that's a different kind of behavior, and it's definitely like anything. It's cultural. It depends on where you are, and it depends on what that person's interested in, to how you think about taking the investment.
Robbie.
So I would just add, these are great points. What I would just add is it's really about risk, and from a cultural perspective. I mean, just think about the DNA of folks that come to the U.S., have crossed the ocean early on in the history of our nation. They're going on a one-way trip. You're never going to come. You're probably not going to come back. So you really are about risk, and so you're absolutely right. I think the U.S. venture capital community, the ecosystem, is the envy of the world. It will continue to be the envy of the world. And so there is this whole notion of let's just try something and see what's going to fly. But on the private equity side, I think what's interesting is that the demand signal for NATO to increase its security and its defense spending does provide opportunities for the larger, mature companies in the supply chain, for there to be investing opportunities to basically surge to meet those demand requirements. And then in other parts of the world, for instance, in the Middle East, where these countries are realizing that their future is not going to be in petroleum, but in other industries, there are large investment opportunities in infrastructure and technology, and even in the world of space, where countries want to have that sort of nationalistic element of they have a space program, right? So there, I think, are going to be interesting opportunities, there.
Well, thank you. I think it's time to hear from our audience. And I think there was an interesting one following along with this investing across the world. So we mentioned this classical paradigm at the very beginning, with the government, the research, the military. And then we talked about a new one coming, VCs, PE, billionaires, family offices. That's another way to say billionaires. So what other non-US funding paradigms are working? Is the China, India? Referee, get us started.
Well, China's tough because China is a different, China gets to do what they want to do, right? So if they decide that they're going to invest in something, they just go invest in it, right? They wipe out the town, they repopulate the town with who they want, they invest into it. So China is a hard paradigm to look at. I don't even know if we know enough about what they're doing to be able to do some really sound economic analysis of what could we take from them and move over to ours. We do know some basics, right? If we had our kids spending more time in education versus in entertainment, we know that there's benefit for that. So there are some things that we know if we look at China and how they've developed. As far as paradigms go, it's still pretty much friends and family mean, no matter where you go, most of the startups you talk to got a loan from my dad. My family has a falafel shop. They let me, use that as my business address. It's, no matter where you go, it's still friends and family that are trying to help these businesses start to get to at least the point where they can have a conversation. So I think friends and family will always remain really important. The challenge for a lot of Americans is when you get outside the US, it feels like everybody's being subsidized. And that feels unfair, but it's just a different economic system, right? Socialism is not necessarily subsidizing, it's how they're choosing to spend their money versus how we spend it in capitalism or how you spend it in communism. So it's difficult to sort of, for me to say what would I take from everywhere else. There are some things I like about how risk-averse Europe is on the startups. I think I've heard better questions asked of the founders by the European VCs. I've added into my due diligence a better set of questions to try to get founders to be honest. And I've learned that from the European VCs. They really do hold them to it, and they'll bring up, you said that last week, why aren't you saying that this week? Versus on the American side, I think we kind of get relaxed. As long as it's going okay, we don't worry about they said something last week because we think they'll do better next week. So that diligence and that risk I really do appreciate on the European side. But I don't really have anything that I would say I would take necessarily from one side or the other. They're such different systems.
Michael?
I would say that we're going to see an influx of European startups. We're seeing it now, but a pickup in volume where European startups who are starved of cash have come to realize that there's easier money here.
But I think the military's not buying from them now.
No, that's true. On the commercial side, it's just strictly commercial. And I mean, we have at least one project today where a Norwegian company that is in our portfolio is raising capital on Wall Street, basically. And this is, I think, and I would agree with you that the disciplines that you see coming from the entrepreneurs are more robust, honest, and straightforward. We don't get so much hype.
Yeah.
We get a lot more fact-based investment making, decision making, et cetera. So I think that's a good thing. I think that's we as investors will do well. Looking more at, in particular, European early stage companies that deserve our capital. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully tariffs are not going to make it so difficult that we have to beg to get our money back. We'll see.
Robbie?
I don't have much more to add except, the discipline of the Heilmeier Catechism and watch out for those Gartner hype curves.
So one other question that we have here. So we were talking about AI, right? And Rob, get us started with this one. So how do we leverage the AI in the investment perspective to develop innovative solutions, right? I mean, aside from the fact that cannot do an airplane with an even number of wings of rotors. Try to ask AI to generate an airplane's got 3 wings, 5 rotors, but no symmetry. Robbie?
No. Well, just first a little bit of from an AI perspective, I really like how DARPA historically has kind of broken up the evolution of AI into sort of 3 epochs, where there was the first epoch of expert systems. So think about like a TurboTax or something where you think it's AI, but it really is, it's an expert system that has been, you go through a very complex, basically branch and a series of branches to come up with some sort of outcome. And then the second, which we're still really living through, which is basically deep neural networks, convolutional networks, and basically has now led into these very large language models. But I'm sure many of you out there know that it ultimately is just, hyperdimensional matrix math and essentially doing curve fitting. So this whole notion of getting into this third wave of really reasoning, sense making, we are a long ways away from that. So when it comes time to applications in aerospace, there's really the element of classic applications of AI at the edge in terms of computer vision or being able to be a pilot's assistant or an astronaut's assistant. And so the use of large language models that have to be, of course, be trained, right, in certain, data sets. So there's a lot of interesting applications that are on that front. What I would just say is that in the investing world, there is a lot of money that is going into these activities here, but it's now being very focused in these hyperscalers, and now it's being driven by the needs for huge energy, guzzling, data centers to train models. So I think where the investment opportunities are going to be about sparse models or being able to be much more efficient and to come up with, completely new paradigms of how to think through, this third wave AI. But at the end of the day, there's so many, applications that are taking place in today's world. I think what I just conclude with is that many of these large language models are not completely physics constrained. So there has to be now this marriage of being physics informed so that you just don't hallucinate and come back with things that may not be really bounded from a reality perspective.
Rafferty, you were nodding.
Yeah, well, so AI on the space side, it is table stakes, right? Like, you're using AI somewhere in your systems because that's just the nature of the way this particular industry is coming up, right? That's how everybody's using it. The winning cases so far, so the cases that we know for sure, and I mean winning in the sense that there's customers on both sides of military and commercial, the products are actually working, and we're actually seeing the beginning of what's going to be the big promise. It's getting we're right there on it. And one of them would be like a company called Ubotica, and they're out of Ireland. They're seasoned people who had already built a company called Movidius, sold it for Intel for $400 million. So these are real people, really know how to build software. And they could not believe that anybody launched anything in space that didn't have compute. For them, that was just but that's debris. You're like that. You can't possibly be doing that. So they've kind of just come into this industry, looked around, and said, well, that's not a good idea. And so they're building the hardware software that's doing the AI compute at the edge on the device, right? So now you don't have to send all the terabytes of data back down from space. You can be doing compute and sending the thing you want. So we know that that'll be a winner everywhere, right? That'll be a winner in aviation. That'll be a winner in aerospace. So that's one of those moments in AI you're like, okay, got it. The other side of it is all the Earth observation data, gobs of it. If you talk to military people, they'll say, don't give me any more images. Don't give me video, don't give me images. Tell me give me the answer of what is showing me. You gave me the picture, but what does it mean? What is the insight that comes out of it? And AI is showing potential there, but there's no such thing as AI cross-Earth observation. It's got to be a model that was trained for counting trees, being able to discern a shadow from a tree, being able to, looking at an agricultural field, seeing a dead spot, and being able to discern, is that overwatering, underwatering, disease, or a shadow? So all of the AI that needs to go into all that imagery and data still has to be really specifically built by the users that actually know what they're looking for on that. So I think that's all pretty exciting. And then I'm pretty excited by the stuff in aviation that you're seeing about how to train pilots, how to do, especially the military training, because I think a lot of that training is the training that you'll eventually see for Space Force to be operating autonomous vehicles, for all the work in drone. As you guys know, once you're flying, you're out of the dimensions. Once you're in space, situationally being able to figure out how far apart we are, even though he looks really close, is still a really hard problem. AI should be able to help with that. But I still think we're going to have to do more physics work in aviation before that's going to be able to go up into space situational awareness.
Michael.
Yeah, so I think WISC announced yesterday that they intended to implement autonomous flight. WISC is as many of you know, is a Boeing investment. They wanted to, they've committed to starting commercial operations by 2030. in autonomous flight. Remarkable statement. I hope it happens.
In what country?
Yeah, exactly. It's probably not going to be in the United States, but that's a good question. Where? Probably the Middle East. I think that the implementation of those types of applications would not be possible without using certain types of automated systems, expert systems, what have you, neural networks, and all of that has to be certified. This is a huge challenge, and companies like Boeing know what they're doing in that area. I think we all agree. So there are so many different challenges and problems that that have to be solved in order for our industry to realize its full potential. And I'll just end with that.
Okay. We got a little more time. So in the coming year, do you foresee startups and PE-owned companies being acquired by a large legacy aerospace company, or will these emerge in a new generation of aerospace companies? Robbie?
No, I think there's going to be an interesting mixture. It's not going to be like the large, consume everything. I think there's going to be a very interesting, rich ecosystem where you'll have companies that will, go public. You'll have companies that will be bought. There'll be aggregation. There'll be companies that will die. So I think there's going to be an interesting, ecosystem. But I think ultimately that cycle of new ideas, and I think from a government, we've been talking a lot about the government perspective. I think the government is definitely becoming much more educated on the role of venture capital. So they're kind of thinking through how this is going to go from a transition perspective. So like the defense innovation units, each of the services have their specific works. And then even the primes also have their own venture, arms to bring things in. But I think ultimately people are recognizing to have a rich, vibrant ecosystem, you're going to have a little bit of everything to really move forward.
Yeah. And we have new primes, right? We have
And new primes.
Anduril's a new prime.
Yeah.
We have in space, we have a company called Redwire. They're rolling up companies. Yeah. That's how they've created their company. Voyager just went public. Voyager is going to be a space prime. So there's new primes as well, and I think that'll all be part of the mix.
Yeah, we need substantially more investment to flow into dual-use technologies and things that are going to be useful in pushing back on China. These days, China is leading in so many advanced technology areas. It's really across the whole spectrum of technologies and applications. And that's to me, there are ways that Congress can incentivize even greater investment in these dual-use areas, provided policy changes are made. And for example, the use of federal loan guarantees. This is an area that we've spent a lot of time on over the last 2 or 3 years. And we have to double, triple, quadruple investment if we expect as a nation and for our national security to be able to, I hate to say it, but to catch up with China. We are now in catch-up mode. We are not leading in many areas. We are now forced to have to catch up with China, and it's a very unpredictable adversary that we have, very capable adversary. What you see and read about China is not important. What the PLA Air Force is doing is important, and it's very hard to understand. We simply need to find new ways of providing even more venture investment for hard tech and deep tech companies in this area. I think it's one of the most significant national security challenges that we face as a country.
Okay, and last question, and I think, Michael, you can continue. What are the key milestones that advanced air mobility needs to meet in the next 3 years to maintain investor confidence? About this.
Yes, well, I think one possibility is that our U.S. innovators in advanced air mobility, the eVTOL developers, are encouraged by a specific region of the world, which is called the Middle East, to set up and demonstrate safe operation of these new capabilities. and to further inform our regulator that we as a country need to move forward very quickly. Now, advanced air mobility, its principal benefits are in densely populated U.S. urban areas. There's a dearth of infrastructure. The helicopter industry has really made it tough for the AAM sector because of the noise and the challenges of using conventional helicopters to move people in urban areas. So you face the situation in Manhattan, for example, where you have very few heliports. Largely they are on the periphery of the city, but where you need to build that infrastructure is in these dense urban areas. And this is one of two infrastructure challenges that the country faces. We're convinced that there's a good investment opportunity here, but there has to be a realignment of policy, regulation, and investment to get there.
Rafferty, any thought from the outside?
10 years ago, not in my wildest dream would I think autonomous air mobility would beat autonomous cars. It just felt like there's no way, right? We have to go through autonomous cars first, right? Wouldn't we, just as a society, have to get the confidence up that this car can get us from here to there before we'd let something fly over our heads? And the fact that it's the exact opposite, we're going to be in autonomous air mobility well ahead of ourselves being into autonomous cars has been pretty surprising to me. I'm excited about the autonomous mobility that's in space. It's really wow, has it come a long way? I'm excited that software, as it develops with its 10,000 hours and all the work it does becomes part of the solutions, as large language model solutions that comes into aviation and hopefully into autonomous cars. But the fact that we're going to be to autonomous flying, I really genuinely thought we'd be done autonomous cars. Infrastructure built, we all understand how it's going to work, which lanes are going to have autonomous cars, how long are we going to be allowed to be hybrid before all the drivers are taken off the road. I thought all that would get done, and then we'd start talking about it. But to see that come first is pretty.
Yeah, you see in general aviation, for example, the OEMs that we have in the United States, most of them are working on autonomy right now. You think about a Cessna Caravan, or I don't care what, and we're beginning to see advanced avionics being rapidly developed, tested successfully. The good news is that airspace is not very busy. So we're not going to be running over dogs and old ladies and things of that nature without some effort. And so I would agree with you. You put it so well that we are actually, I think, going to see the aerospace sector beat the automotive sector in automation. Very exciting.
Robbie, your thoughts?
Well, just one other thought. When it comes to advanced air mobility, and that is, when you talk, so we at Service are not investing in AM, but a milestone, and from personal experience being at Electra.aero, is hybridization of the propulsion system.
Yep.
Because the battery technology, while it's advancing, is never going to get you that level. You fly in the Middle East, you're blasting that air conditioner while you're in this 120-degree, Abu Dhabi weather, and all of a sudden you get a sandstorm, and now you got to divert, and your battery is where is it now? So I think from an investing perspective, once these companies, and many of them have gone down that pathway to a true hybridized, power propulsion system, then now we have some chance of
You're talking hydrogen too.
Yeah.
So hydrogen is a whole nother story.
It's a whole other.
But again, on the spectrum, let's go do the a petroleum-based hybrid solution. Then you can go into hydrogen, etc. So
Space is seeing that exactly. Two kinds of propulsion systems on the same vehicle. One is for the close maneuvering. One is for the far maneuvering. And that's giving more opportunity in space. So, and that's all technology taken from exactly what you're talking about, coming up into space. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we're almost out of time. I wanted to thank my panelists, Rafferty, Michael, Robbie. Thank you so much.